Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, yeah, like engineering.
Right, exactly like engineering. It's binary.
Yeah.
You break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take the x-ray, and it shows that, that jagged white line on the black background.
And the doctor just points at it with a pen and says, well, there it is.
Yeah, there's the problem. And frankly, that's really comforting. We like things to be visible like that.
Oh, absolutely. We want to categorize a problem so we can apply a specific, measurable solution to it.
Exactly. Like, if I have an infection, do me the antibiotic.
Right.
Or if the car engine is knocking, you replace the spark plug.
Right. I mean, we are so conditioned to seek out a mechanical fix for almost every single area of our lives.
We really are. But then you step into the world of human relationships.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Right. You step into neurodevelopment or trauma or, love, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
It's totally useless. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Because human relationships, they just don't operate on the laws of physics.
No.
They operate on these massive layers of history and emotion and deeply ingrained beliefs.
Yeah. And I'd argue that nowhere are those waters deeper or muddier or more highly contested than when we start talking about marriage.
Oh, without a doubt.
So welcome to this deep dive. Because today, for everyone listening, our mission is to explore a really profound, very ancient, and honestly, highly misunderstood theology of marriage.
It really is misunderstood.
Yeah, and the primary engine driving our conversation today is this incredibly powerful message from the Church of 1122.
Right, the sermon titled Marriage and Divorce, Impossible to Possible.
Exactly. And what we're going to do is use that specific sermon as our anchor.
Right.
We want to look at marriage not just as a social contract.
Right.
And not just as some, rom-com romance thing either, but as a living, breathing, flesh and blood sermon that couples are actually actively preaching to the world around them every single day.
Which is such a massive, weighty claim to make.
It really is.
So because of that, we're going to pull in a lot of historical and linguistic context to really, test the structural integrity of these arguments.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating stack of supplemental sources today.
We do. We're going to dive into the ancient Near East, look at some of the original Hebrew and Greek concepts, and wrestle with some heavy philosophical and theological frameworks that back up or, in some cases, add some really crucial nuance to what that 1122 sermon is presenting.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this message, it starts with this massive foundational paradigm shift right out of the gate.
It really does.
It completely upends the modern narrative by claiming that human beings didn't actually invent marriage.
Right.
And if you think about it, the secular history of the world usually frames marriage as this gradual cultural evolution.
Oh, yeah, like human beings needed a way to protect property rights or establish paternity or form alliances between warring tribes, right?
Exactly. So we just created this legal status out of thin air.
And that is definitely the dominant anthropological view today. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It treats marriage as a human technology, just a social tool we invented to solve societal problems.
But the 1122 sermon, it starts by just dismantling that entirely.
Completely. The claim here is that God is the architect and the designer.
Right.
Marriage is a cosmic blueprint that predates human civilization. It predates property laws, governments, all of it.
I mean, if you read the Genesis account the way this sermon frames it, Adam didn't just wake up in the Garden of Eden, look at Eve, and decide, hey, I've got a great idea to optimize our agricultural output and secure our legacy.
Right, right. Let's create a legal, moral, and spiritual lifelong binding covenant and call it marriage.
Exactly. It wasn't some human innovation. It was a divine institution from the very jump.
What's fascinating here is that before we can even talk about what marriage does in a society or how to fix it when it breaks, we have to establish this origin point.
Yeah, because it dictates everything else.
Exactly. It dictates what the primary source calls the math of marriage. And this math revolves around an ancient Hebrew concept of cleaving.
Oh, the math is wild. It is completely counterintuitive to how we think.
Right.
The pastor in the sermon points out that in everyday human logic, 1 + 1 = 2.
Basic math.
Right. You take one individual, you add another individual, and you have a partnership of two people.
But in the Genesis account of marriage, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2.
Yeah.
it equals one.
Right. The two become one flesh.
Which is such a strange phrase when you really stop and think about it.
It is, and to really grasp how radical that is, we have to look at the Hebrew word used in Genesis 2.24 for cleave or hold fast.
Okay, what is it?
The word is dabak, and linguists and theologians, like if you look at the classic Keel and Delitzsch commentary on the Old Testament, they point out that this word isn't just about hanging out closely.
Right, like being good roommates.
Exactly. It means to cling to adhere, almost like being literally glued together.
Yeah, they describe this union as the deepest corporeal and spiritual unity.
So it's definitely not just a poetic metaphor for getting along really well,
No.
or like finishing each other's sentences.
Not at all. In fact, if we look at the specific language behind the word become in the text, it implies creation ex nihilo.
Wait, creation out of nothing?
Yes, creation out of nothing. The implication is that something is being created in that exact moment of union that simply did not exist anywhere in the universe the day before.
That is wild. It's a completely new entity.
Precisely. Philosophers actually call this an ontological shift.
An ontological shift. Okay, explain that a bit.
It means it's a change in the very nature of your being. You are no longer just two autonomous individuals walking side by side down the same path.
Right.
A new, singular, indivisible reality has been formed.
Okay, if you really believe that, I mean, that completely changes your posture toward the whole institution.
Absolutely.
If you think you invented marriage, it's like thinking you invented the internet just because you logged onto a website today.
That's a perfect analogy.
You're participating in a system that was built long before you got there, with rules of engagement you didn't write, and, source code you can't alter.
Right.
But let me push back on this a little bit, because I know exactly how this sounds to modern ears.
Oh, sure.
This idea of becoming one flesh,
Yeah.
this massive ontological shift, it can sound deeply suffocating.
It really can.
Right. In a culture that prizes self-actualization above almost everything else, doesn't the idea of becoming one inherently mean erasing individual identity?
That is probably the most common modern anxiety regarding traditional marriage.
Yeah, like, doesn't one person inevitably just get absorbed by the other and lose who they are?
We fear enmeshment. We fear the loss of the self. But if you dig into the mechanics of this unity in the theology, it's not about the erasure of the individual at all. Really? No, it is the forming of a new, unified front. Think of it like a chemical reaction.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
Think about water. You have hydrogen and you have oxygen.
Right. Two totally different things.
Exactly. Two highly distinct elements with their own very specific properties. But when they combine to make H2O, the hydrogen doesn't stop being hydrogen, and the oxygen doesn't cease to exist.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. But together, they form a completely new substance that has completely new properties. Properties neither possessed on their own.
Right, because water can put out a fire, whereas oxygen on its own fuels it.
Exactly. The unity doesn't destroy the components, it repurposes them into a higher form.
That makes a lot of sense. The elements are still there, completely intact, but their ultimate function has been elevated.
Yes. And according to the 1122 sermon, this chemical reaction, this supernatural joining, isn't something the couple is actually doing on their own.
No, and it certainly isn't being done by the state either.
That is a very crucial distinction. We tend to view the wedding day as a legal transaction facilitated by an authority figure we hired, right?
Right. The pastor in the sermon has this great joke about the officiant.
Oh, yeah, I love that part.
You hire your buddy or your cousin who went online and got an internet certificate to officiate weddings for like $50.
Right.
The cousin didn't actually join you together. The state of Florida or the government of whatever country you live in, they didn't execute the joining.
No, they just signed the paperwork acknowledging it happened.
Yeah. And what the theology pushes even further is that you didn't even join yourselves together.
The core claim here is that it is a supernatural joining performed by God himself. He is the active agent in the union.
Which is heavy.
It is. And this is why Jesus, when he's debating the religious leaders in the Gospel of Matthew, he reaches all the way back to Genesis and concludes, "What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder or break apart."
So if God is the one doing the fusing, the nature of this agreement is just fundamentally different from any other human legal agreement we enter into.
Entirely different.
Like, it's not an employment contract. It's not a mortgage.
No, it is a covenant.
Right, a covenant.
Yeah.
And the sources we are looking at make a massive canyon-sized distinction between those two words, contract versus covenant.
Yes. We throw them around interchangeably today, but they are absolutely not the same thing.
They really aren't.
They operate on entirely different planes of existence.
Yeah.
The 1122 sermon stresses that the God of the Bible relates to his people covenantally. The entire biblical narrative, from Noah to Abraham to Moses to David, all the way to Jesus, it's structured around a series of covenants.
Right. So therefore, marriage, because it is designed by this specific God, is fundamentally a covenant.
Exactly. And to really grasp the weight of that, we can turn to some brilliant philosophical work by the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks.
Oh, I loved his stuff on this.
Right. He wrote extensively on this exact distinction.
I found his framing so helpful because it diagnoses exactly why so many modern relationships feel, well, incredibly fragile.
They do. They feel very brittle.
Yeah. He essentially says that a contract is a transaction based on mutual interests. It's just a negotiation.
Right. You have something I want. Maybe it's companionship or financial stability or status, and I have something you want.
So let's make a deal. We draw up terms.
Exactly. But a covenant is based on identity.
Yes.
It's not two parties making a trade. It's two parties coming together to form a permanent us.
As Sachs puts it, contracts are designed to benefit you, but covenants are designed to transform you.
That's the key right there. And that transformation requires a completely different mechanism of commitment.
Because in a contract, you are always assessing your return on investment.
Always.
The moment the cost outweighs the benefit, the logical thing to do is terminate the contract. It's just a basic self-protection mechanism.
But a covenant bypasses that entirely. There's a supplemental insight from a theological organization called Fierce Marriage, specifically an interview with Pastor Matt Chandler, where he defines a covenant in a really striking way.
What is he?
He essentially says it means saying to another person, I will even if you won't.
Wow. I will even if you won't.
Yeah.
That is incredibly heavy. I mean, that goes completely against the grain of our modern consumer mindset.
Completely.
If I buy a blender and it stops working, I don't keep loving the blender.
Right. You don't commit to the broken blender.
No, I return it. I demand a refund. Or I throw it in the trash and buy a new one. And we've kind of taken that exact same consumer framework and mapped it onto human beings.
We absolutely have. We treat relationships as consumer goods. But Chandler points out that a biblical covenant operates entirely beyond the emotive state.
Beyond the emotive state.
Because in modern romance, love is almost exclusively defined as an emotional high, a feeling of intense affection.
But feelings are notoriously unstable.
Oh, highly unstable. They fluctuate based on stress, blood sugar, career success, a million other variables.
Yeah, so if a marriage is built solely on maintaining that emotional high, it is pretty much guaranteed to collapse.
Which is exactly why the historic, traditional wedding vows are written the way they are.
Oh, that's a great point. They are brutally realistic.
They really are. They don't say for better, for health and richness,
Right.
as long as we both feel deeply fulfilled.
Right. No, they explicitly say for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health.
The vows themselves are an acknowledgement that the emotions will fade, the circumstances will deteriorate, tragedy might strike, but the covenant remains the anchor through all of it.
Let's dig into the historical Old Testament context for a second here, just to see how seriously this was actually taken.
Let's do it.
If we look at the book of Malachi, specifically chapter 2, verses 10 through 16, it really hammers home the severity of a covenant.
It does, very intensely.
In this text, God is portrayed not just as the architect of marriage, but as a literal witness standing between a man and the wife of his youth.
Right.
Set the scene for us here. What is actually happening in Malachi? Because this isn't just some generic proverb.
Yeah.
This is a very specific historical crisis, right?
It is. So Malachi is a prophet delivering a severe rebuke to the people of Judah after they had returned from exile. And the community was in serious spiritual decay. And one of the primary symptoms of that decay was that the men of Judah were divorcing their older wives, the wives they had married in their youth.
And why were they doing that?
In order to marry younger foreign women. And this wasn't just about age or aesthetics. These foreign marriages involved adopting foreign idolatry. The men were basically tossing aside their covenant partners for a better societal or economic deal.
They were treating the marriage exactly like a contract that had just expired.
Exactly. And God's response to the prophet is just visceral. He states that he himself was the witness to that original marriage covenant.
Wow.
Therefore, breaking it isn't just a civil dispute. It's not just a breach of contract. It is seen as profaning something holy.
It's described as an act of spiritual violence.
Yes. The text says that God actually no longer accepts their offerings at the altar because they have dealt treacherously with the wife of their youth.
That's intense.
It is. The vertical relationship with God is directly severed by their horizontal betrayal of the covenant.
So if I'm listening to this right now, as someone living today, I'm probably asking, okay, that's fascinating ancient history, but how does this apply to me today?
Right. What does it actually mean for us?
Yeah. What does this shift from a contract mindset to a covenant mindset actually look like in a modern living room? Especially if I grew up in a culture that views marriage purely as a legal right, a tax benefit, or just the ultimate validation of a romantic feeling.
Honestly, it radically rewires how you handle conflict. That's the most practical day-to-day application.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, in a contractual relationship, conflict is an existential threat.
Right.
If my partner fails me, if they're selfish, if we enter a season of coldness or resentment, my contractual brain says they have breached the terms of the agreement.
The deal is off.
Right, the deal is off. I am justified in walking away.
It creates a dynamic where both people are just constantly auditioning for the marriage.
Yes, keeping score, making sure the chore chart is exactly 50-50.
Yeah, just internally auditing the relationship every day to ensure they're getting a fair deal.
It's the quiet quitting of marriage. People just start pulling back their investments because they don't like the quarterly returns.
Oh man, quiet quitting of marriage. That
Yeah.
is such a good way to phrase it.
But in a covenant, a breach, a failure, a mistake, a harsh word, even a season of profound disconnection is not an exit strategy.
Right.
It is a call to restoration. The covenant demands that you turn toward the conflict and work toward healing because you are bound together by something much higher than your current mutual satisfaction.
You don't have one foot out the door.
Exactly, you're in it.
Which, ironically, is really the only thing that actually creates true intimacy anyway.
It's the safety net.
Yeah? It's the safety net that allows you to be totally vulnerable. Because if I know that my partner can just hit the eject button the second they see my deepest flaws, I'm never going to show them my flaws.
No, you'll just manage your PR in your own house.
Exactly. But a covenant says, I see the worst of you, and I'm not going anywhere.
And that is the only soil where real love can grow.
But, this brings up a massive, almost existential question.
What's that?
If marriage is this unbreakable supernatural covenant that requires so much sacrifice, so much dying to self as kuts, what is its ultimate goal?
Right.
Like, why did God go through all this trouble to design this incredibly difficult, heavy machinery of covenant?
And this brings us to the absolute core thesis of the 1122 sermon. This is the paradigm shift that kind of explains everything else we're talking about today.
Yeah, this is the big one.
The pastor argues that the primary reason God created marriage in the first place was not for human happiness.
Okay, I want everyone listening to just pause and let that sink in, because that is basically heresy in modern culture.
It is completely 100% countercultural.
Yeah.
The sermon asserts that marriage wasn't primarily created for companionship. It wasn't even primarily created for procreation or raising a stable family.
Now, obviously, the scripture deeply acknowledges that companionship, joy, and children are wonderful, intended byproducts.
Of course. They are incredible blessings of the covenant. But they are not the reason for the covenant.
Right. Happiness, kids, having someone to watch Netflix with on a Tuesday night, splitting the mortgage, those are features.
Great features.
There's great features.
Yeah.
But they are not the main operating system.
No. The ultimate purpose, according to the sermon, is for marriage to be a physical, tangible, flesh and blood representation of Jesus Christ's relationship to his bride, the church.
This is a profound theological leap.
It really is. And it's one that the Apostle Paul makes explicitly in Ephesians chapter 5.
Right.
Paul is giving all these practical instructions on marriage, and out of nowhere, he quotes that Genesis 2.24 passage we talked about earlier about a man leaving his father and mother and becoming one flesh with his wife.
Yeah.
But then Paul does something wild. He says, this mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church.
He drops an absolute theological bombshell right there.
He really does.
He's basically saying, hey, you thought Genesis was just about Adam and Eve getting together. You thought the first marriage was just about human population. No. The entire time, for thousands of years, marriage was just a shadow pointing to Jesus.
Exactly. The human institution was always meant to be a scale model of a cosmic reality.
Man.
There is a supplemental source we looked at from a theological journal called Unio cum Christo, which translates to union with Christ, and it explains Paul's move here. using a linguistic framework called cross-domain mapping.
Okay, explain that for us, because it sounds like a computer science term.
Right.
But it's actually a really fascinating way to understand how the Bible uses metaphor.
Cross-domain mapping is just a fancy way linguists describe how humans use something familiar to explain something completely incomprehensible.
Okay.
You map the traits of one domain onto another. In this case, the source domain, the thing we can see and touch and understand, is mundane, everyday human marriage.
Right. The wedding ring, the shared bank account, the daily apologies, growing old together.
Exactly. That's the source domain. Now, the target domain, the massive, abstract, infinite spiritual reality it points to, is Jesus, the heavenly bridegroom, uniting himself eternally with humanity through the new covenant.
Got it.
Paul is literally mapping the reality of Christ's love onto the physical structure of a human marriage.
Okay, if I'm understanding this correctly, here's where it gets really interesting for the everyday person.
Yeah,
Think about it like a billboard on the side of a massive highway.
I love this analogy.
Your marriage is that billboard.
Yeah.
And the question this theology forces you to ask is, if your marriage is a billboard standing on the side of the highway of life, what product is it advertising?
Right.
According to this sermon, your marriage is designed to advertise the gospel.
Yes. You are preaching a sermon every single day to your kids, to your neighbors, to your coworkers, and to a world that doesn't know Jesus.
That is the exact metaphor the 1122 pastor uses. Your marriage is a living sermon.
And the content of that sermon is meant to display God's relentless, forgiving, covenantal love. We can even deepen this by bringing in a supplemental insight from the late pastor Adrian Rogers.
Oh yeah, he talked about the divine triangle, right?
Exactly. The divine triangle, which is based on Romans 11.36. That verse says, "For of him and through him and to him are all things."
Okay, so map that divine triangle onto like a couple sitting at the breakfast table dealing with a really frustrating morning.
Okay.
How does of him, through him, to him apply to burned toast and a sharp tone of voice?
Well, it changes the entire perspective of the room. First, marriage is of him. It originates with God. He designed the blueprint.
Right. You didn't invent this arrangement, so you have to follow the manufacturer's instructions.
Exactly. Second, it operates through him. A covenant is so demanding and so contrary to our selfish human nature that it actually requires the grace and forgiveness and daily spirit of God to sustain it.
Because you just cannot love a flawed human being perfectly through your own willpower.
No, you'll burn out. You need his power flowing through you.
Right.
And third, its ultimate objective is to him.
To him, meaning it points back.
Right. The goal of a healthy marriage isn't just to make you feel fulfilled. It is to bring glory back to God by showing the world a picture of his love.
So the cosmic picture is that marriage is fundamentally not about the couple.
No, the couple is just the mirror.
Yes. The couple is a mirror reflecting a much larger eternal reality.
Which is an incredibly beautiful thought.
It is, but honestly,
Yeah.
it also raises the stakes to an almost terrifying height.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if marriage is meant to be this perfect living picture of God's never-ending, unbreakable love for his people, what happens when that picture shatters?
Yeah.
What happens when the billboard falls down?
Right.
Because we don't live in a theological textbook. We live in a very broken world.
We do, and we have to address the fracture. We have to talk about the difficult, painful, and messy reality of divorce.
We do. And this is where the source material presents some of the most challenging, emotionally heavy, and fiercely debated theology.
Yes. Because the standard is so high, the failure of that standard carries immense, immense weight.
Right. According to the 1122 sermon, the pastor leans heavily into the absolute permanence of the covenant. He points out that in the Old Testament, God literally says he hates divorce.
He calls divorce his enemy.
And the reason given in the sermon goes right back to that billboard analogy we just talked about.
Exactly.
If my marriage is meant to display that God will never leave me or forsake me, referencing Romans chapter 8, which says absolutely nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, then breaking a marriage covenant sends a false message to the world.
It preaches a false sermon.
It does. It suggests that God's love can end, that his covenant can be broken if you push him hard enough.
And God vehemently rejects that misrepresentation of his character. We see the sheer intensity of this back in Malachi 2.1 theme, which we touched on earlier.
Right, about the violence.
Yes. Some translations of that text say that God hates a man covering his garment with the violence of divorce.
The word violence really stands out there. It's not just a sad occurrence or a mutual parting of ways. It's described as a violent tearing.
And to understand why it's described as violence, you really have to know the ancient Near East context of the garment.
Okay, tell us about that.
In that culture, a man spreading his outer garment or cloak over a woman was a profound symbol of protection, provision, and covenant marriage.
Like in the story of Ruth.
Exactly like Ruth, where she asks Boaz to spread his wing or his garment over her as a redeemer.
Wow, okay.
So to divorce a woman you had made a covenant with was to take that very same garment of safety and cover it with the blood and violence of betrayal.
It was the ultimate bait and switch.
It was. You promised protection and you delivered destruction.
Now, as we navigate this, I want to make sure we are exploring the full breadth of the text we've gathered.
Absolutely.
The 1122 sermon focuses heavily, and rightfully so, on this unbreakable ideal of the covenant and God's hatred for its destruction.
Right.
But we also have another source, the Enduring Word Commentary by David Guzik, which provides a highly detailed, systematic analysis of the biblical texts regarding divorce.
Yes, and Guzik highlights the very real tensions in the text that acknowledge human brokenness.
Guzik's commentary is really crucial here because it pushes back against certain, maybe more extreme theological interpretations.
Right. There are teachings out there which argue that the marriage bond can absolutely never be broken by anything other than physical death.
And that any subsequent divorce and remarriage, regardless of the circumstances, is just a perpetual, ongoing state of adultery.
But Guzik points out that while permanence is the absolute, undeniable ideal, Jesus himself actually addresses the failure of that ideal.
Right. When Jesus is tested by the Pharisees in Matthew 19 about whether a man can divorce his wife for any reason at all, Jesus points back to Genesis, the one flesh union.
Yes.
But then he acknowledges a caveat. He talks about the hardness of human hearts.
Exactly. Guzik's analysis argues that while God hates divorce, God explicitly permits it in very specific biblical cases as a concession to human sin.
Okay, so what are those cases?
Well, the primary exception Jesus gives in Matthew 19 is for sexual immorality. The Greek word used there is porneia.
Let's pause on porneia for a second. What does that actually encompass in a first-century context? Because people debate this word endlessly.
They really do. It's a broad term for severe sexual betrayal. It encompasses adultery, but it implies a deep, ongoing breaking of the one-flesh bond through sexual sin.
Okay.
And Guzik notes that in this specific biblical case, the marriage bond hasn't just been strained, it has been genuinely, legally, and spiritually severed by the offending party.
So the divorce is simply the tragic legal recognition of a bond that the unfaithful spouse has actually already destroyed.
Exactly.
And Guzik also brings up a second biblical concession, which comes from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 7.
Right. The abandonment of a believer by an unbelieving spouse.
How does Paul frame that?
Paul addresses a situation where a Christian is married to someone who completely rejects the faith and absolutely refuses to live with them, choosing to abandon the marriage.
Right.
Paul says in those cases, the deserted believer is not bound. And Guzik argues that in these specific cases, severe sexual immorality and absolute abandonment, the innocent party is considered free from the covenant and free to remarry in the Lord.
Guzik even brings up a wild, almost uncomfortable Old Testament case study from Ezra chapter 10.
Oh, yeah. That one is intense.
It is. After the exile, the returning Israelites were actually commanded by the religious leaders to put away the pagan wives they had unlawfully married.
Because the marriages were leading the entire nation back into the exact same idolatry that destroyed them in the first place.
Right. Now, Guzik notes that's a highly unique, singular historical event. It's definitely not a template for today.
No, not at all.
But it proves that God's interactions with human marriage are sometimes extremely complex.
They are.
Guzik uses a really striking analogy to summarize his view on remarriage for the innocent party.
What's the analogy?
He basically says that telling someone they must divorce a current, validly married second spouse in order to repent and return to their first spouse, it's like trying to correct the sin of stealing by committing a second robbery.
Wow. Yeah, it just compounds the violence. It creates more collateral damage under the guise of purity.
Exactly. But, if I'm listening to these two perspectives, the absolute permanence emphasized in the 1122 sermon and the legal concessions outlined by Guzik, I'm left with a real tension here.
It is a profound tension.
How do we synthesize this? If God is perfect and he hates divorce, why does he provide a legal mechanism for it in Matthew and Corinthians?
I think the synthesis comes down to understanding cause and effect in a fallen world. Think about a medical analogy.
Okay.
God hates the disease of divorce. He hates the sin, the betrayal, the abuse, and the hardness of heart that causes it.
Right. He hates the deep trauma it inflicts on the human soul, on the children, on the family unit.
Yes, but because we live in a world infected by sin, he provides divorce as a mechanism of protection, almost like an amputation.
An amputation. Man, that's a brutal image, but it makes perfect sense.
Right.
No doctor wants to amputate a leg. They hate the fact that they have to do it. But if gangrene has set in and the infection is going to kill the patient, they perform the amputation to save the life.
Exactly. The goal of the divine law is always to protect the integrity of the covenant. But grace and practical protection exist because human beings are frail, deeply flawed, and sometimes profoundly destructive.
So God hates the amputation, but he permits it to save the victimized spouse in cases of severe betrayal or abandonment.
Exactly.
So if human marriage is a picture of God and humanity constantly breaks the covenant through our own spiritual adultery and sin, we have to ask a pretty big question here.
Which is?
How does God himself model this covenant love when he is the one being betrayed?
Yeah.
Does he just amputate us?
And that question leads us to what is arguably the most stunning, shocking, and historically visceral illustration of grace in all of literature.
It really is.
To see how God responds to a broken covenant, the sources point us directly to the story of the prophet Hosea.
This story is mind-blowing. If you're listening and you've never heard it, it sounds like absolute fiction, but it was a historical reality.
It was.
God commands his prophet Hosea to go and marry a woman named Gomer. And Gomer is not a respected woman in the community. She's explicitly described in the text as a wife of whoredom, known for her promiscuity.
It is an incredibly scandalous text. Just try to put yourself in Hosea's shoes for a minute.
Right.
You are a holy man, a prophet chosen to speak for Yahweh, and God tells you that your actual physical life, your home, your bed, is going to be a living sermon.
But it's not going to be a happy one.
No. You are commanded to live out a broken, agonizing, humiliating marriage in order to show the entire nation of Israel exactly what it feels like to be God.
That is the key insight from the Fierce Marriage Supplement we reviewed. They discuss how the book of Hosea forces a total paradigm shift in how we view God.
It does. We almost exclusively think of God as the judge, right? The one sitting on the throne handing down verdicts.
Yeah. But Hosea shows us God as the heartbroken, betrayed spouse.
It elicits profound empathy.
It really does. The text is basically inviting any human spouse who has felt the deep, gut-wrenching agony of betrayal to look at God and realize he knows exactly how you feel.
Because we commit perpetual spiritual adultery against him every single day when we choose our idols over him.
And the tragedy of the story plays out exactly as you'd expect. Gomer doesn't stay.
No.
Despite Hosea's love, she leaves him. She abandons the covenant. She goes back to her lovers, back to her old life.
But that life of sin eventually bankrupts her completely.
Yeah.
She ends up utterly destitute to the point where she is literally sold into slavery.
She is standing on an auction block.
Yes.
And what does God tell Hosea to do? Because this is the moment that defines the entire theology of the covenant.
Right.
God doesn't say, see, I told you so. She got what she deserved. Write up the divorce papers.
No. He says to Hosea, go buy her back. Go love her again.
Wow. And so Hosea walks into a slave market. Just paint the picture in your mind. The sights, the smells, the absolute humiliation of his wife standing there.
And Hosea pays the price. The text says he buys her back for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley.
He purchases his own unfaithful wife out of slavery to restore her to his home.
It is the ultimate cross-domain mapping.
It really is.
It is the gospel acted out in real time centuries before Jesus was even born. Hosea buying Gomer out of slavery is a direct, prophetic preview of the cross.
Jesus, the heavenly bridegroom, paying the ultimate price not with silver and barley, but with his own blood to redeem his unfaithful, rebellious bride from the slavery of sin.
It is relentless, terrifying love. It's Matt Chandler's definition of the covenant, I will, even if you won't, played out in its purest, most absolute form.
And this connects so beautifully to the supplementary analysis we have from pastors.ai on Proverbs 24.1c's. Yes,
The proverb says, the righteous fall 7 times and rise again.
that text is so crucial for understanding what covenant resilience actually looks like on the ground.
It is, because the pastors.ai insights point out that in Hebrew literature, the number 7 isn't just a literal integer. It signifies completeness, or frequency, or totality.
So it doesn't mean you get exactly 7 mistakes and on the 8th you're out.
No, it means the righteous fall repeatedly. Completely. Over and over.
The defining characteristic of a righteous person or a successful covenant isn't that they never fail. It's not some flawless track record.
No.
It's that they rely on God's grace to get back up. They don't stay in the dirt.
One of the sermons analyzed in that pastor's AI source brings up the Apostle Peter as the ultimate New Testament example of
Oh,
this.
Peter's story is perfect here.
Peter profoundly, spectacularly failed the covenant. On the night of Jesus' arrest, Peter denied even knowing him. 3 separate times.
He broke the vow. He completely shattered the billboard.
But what happens in John chapter 21? Jesus, the resurrected bridegroom, pursues Peter. He cooks him breakfast on the beach.
Yeah.
He restores him. He reinstates his calling. The capacity to be restored after a massive failure is the hallmark of the covenant.
Which brings such an overwhelming, desperately needed sense of hope to anyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Absolutely.
Because whether you are currently happily married, whether you are single and longing for marriage, whether you are walking through the agonizing amputation of a divorce, or whether you have failed completely in your relationships.
Yeah.
The 11:22 sermon ends on this incredibly triumphant, defiant note. If the tomb is empty, anything is possible.
The resurrection just changes the math all over again.
It really does.
The story of Hosea, the story of Peter, the very existence of a God who operates by covenant instead of contractarity, it all proves that redemption is always, always God's preferred ending to the human story.
It completely reframes how we view failure and success. It moves the metric entirely from human perfection to divine grace.
It does.
So let's sort of summarize this massive journey we've been on today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started by looking at how the 11:22 sermon fundamentally redefines marriage. It's not a human contract you negotiate for mutual benefit, right?
Yeah, right. It's a divine invention you participate in.
We saw that it operates through the supernatural, unbreakable mechanics of covenantal love, where 1 + 1 equals a brand new ontological entity.
And we explored how its primary purpose isn't just our personal fulfillment, but to be a living billboard, a flesh and blood sermon to the world reflecting Christ's sacrificial love for the church.
Then we looked at the agonizing reality of the fracture, how God hates the violent tearing of the covenant, yet provides these concessions and amputations of grace to protect the vulnerable from the hardness of human hearts.
And finally, we saw through the shocking life of Hosea that God himself models this relentless pursuit, willingly stepping into the slave market to buy us back from our own unfaithfulness.
So why should you, listening right now, care about all of this theology?
That's the big question.
Because whether you ever wear a wedding ring or not, this changes how you view love itself. It forces a radical shift.
It forces you to move from the modern consumer question, what can I get out of this relationship? What's my ROI? To the covenantal question, what story is this relationship telling the world about God?
It demands that we look beyond our immediate emotional needs, beyond our chore charts and our petty scorekeeping, and recognize the cosmic weight of our commitments.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we close out this deep dive today.
Lay it on us.
If human marriage is ultimately just a temporary earthly shadow, if it really is just a billboard designed to point us to the eternal permanent reality of being perfectly united with God,
Yeah.
how should that change the way we live today? Specifically, how should it change the intense, sometimes crushing cultural pressure we put on finding a soulmate?
Oh, man, we place an impossible burden on our spouses, don't we?
We really do. We ask them to be our God, our ultimate fulfiller, our Savior.
And human beings make terrible gods.
They make the worst gods.
Yeah.
But if the ultimate marriage, the true fulfillment of our deepest, most desperate need for unity, is actually already secured for us in Christ,
Then perhaps that reality finally frees us.
it frees us from demanding absolute perfection from our human relationships here on earth. It frees us to actually love a flawed person because we know they aren't meant to save us.
Right.
Because in the end, that X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of the show,
Yeah.
it doesn't work on the human heart.
No, it doesn't.
The waters of human love and human failure will always be murky. We will always hurt each other. But the promise of the covenant ensures that even in the deepest, muddiest waters of life, you are never swimming alone.